East Anglia, sometime after the Second World War. They're laying the runways for an airport called Stansted, part of the rebuilding of Britain using American aid, the so-called Marshall Plan. Many of the tractors and diggers used here stayed in the country, and nearly 70 years later, it's tractors which are up for auction in one of the biggest events of its type in the country. This is Cheffins' vintage sale in Cambridgeshire, where classic tractors are consigned to another life in the hands of collectors who are not bothered by the odd flat tyre.
We get people from all walks of life. We get people that land in a helicopter, people turn up on a bike. We're never quite sure who's going to bid on what. It's difficult to explain to someone what our collective vintage sales are like, but someone did describe it once as a rock concert for rust, which is probably quite accurate considering the amount of people and the frenzy that it can generate.
This is every little boy's dream. Little boys who are now old enough to write a cheque.
They hold a lot of value to a lot of people. They can be almost a nostalgic value when they drove one as a child and they sort of either track down the very tractor that they drove when they were younger, or they want a similar one that they used to operate, and then people like them in any sorts of condition. It might be very original or it might be fully restored, and then they are very proud men and they like to show them at sort of various shows and rallies, take them on road runs, use them in ploughing matches, but yeah, they're used for various sort of tasks around the farm, if you like.
Here are all the famous names: Ford, Massey Ferguson, David Brown, John Deere, Field Marshall, Fordson.
Well, what we've got here is a 1963 Fordson Super Major, and that's a Field Marshal. It's a very, very original example. It's come from one of our regular collectors and enthusiasts. It's got a few extras on it. It's got power steering, front wheel weights, and it's an unusual, there's not a huge amount of them made. It's very original. A lot of them were repainted or resprayed because the paintwork or the front cowl might have been dented and just to general use. This is a very nice example, and we're hoping it'll do well in today's auction.
At these sales, concourse condition isn't everything. As Oliver Godfrey says, nostalgia comes into it, and rarity. With the buyer's premium, the 1963 Fordson fetches £5,600. Cheffins are hoping for similar success when it comes to motorbikes. 50 of them are on the block today. From barn finds estimated at a couple of £100 to a 1919 Triumph Junior at up to £3,500.
Motorcycles are an ever desirable thing, and they're a lot easier to sell than cars. A, because you can sneak one home without anybody ever knowing, and B, just because there's a lot of people love them and they're easy to keep, and in comparison to a classic car, they're very, very cheap. Well, I think all the Triumphs and Nortons that we see here, they're all of great interest. You find with a lot of these things, the people that buy them have reached an age now where they can actually afford the thing they couldn't afford when they were young and should have had it, and so it's a kind of generational thing. And as the years go by, so that what becomes interesting moves on in time, so 70s and 80s machines become more desirable to the general public as the general public gets older. But nobody ever falls out of love with these old 50s and 60s machines. They're just lovely, iconic things. Well, there's a lovely old 1919 Triumph Junior. It's from the days when traffic wasn't an issue. There's no clutch on it. So when you come to a junction, you stop the engine, and then when the horse and carts have all disappeared, you kind of drop the decompression lever and pedal yourself off, and it fires up and off you go. But that's a lovely thing. It's been in a barn for a long time. Somebody must have restored it about 30 years ago, I think, and never touched it, so it needs restoring all over again. But nice rare thing, again not very expensive, perhaps £2,000 or £3,000 would buy it, but a joyous little toy.
So, the Triumph, made a year after the end of the First World War, fetches £4,500. Jeremy Curzon is hoping for a similar price when it comes to selling a 1929 350cc Calthorpe, offered for the first time in many years.
It's a pretty uncommon make. Calthorpe is a good old British manufacturer, and whereas in the period, this is a 1929 machine, in the period everybody was producing a black bike. And this became known as the Ivory Calthorpe, and it was not greeted kindly by a very conservative riding public because of its colour, but it is just a rare machine. It's a very beautiful machine, hand change gearbox. It should have lighting on it, but this particular example's been in the same family ownership for donkey's years, absolutely donkey's years, and it's never been finished. So there's plenty of work to do for the next custodian of it. It's a great thing with a separate gearbox, completely separate to the engine. It's a very basic sort of thing, but it's overhead valve, so it would have cracked along at a fair speed in its day.
The estimate on the Calthorpe is between £2,500 and £3,500. The Calthorpe goes for over £1,000 more than expected. At the end of a long day, with 3,500 lots knocked down, the auctioneers are happy. The vintage sale has attracted record crowds. Many people just came for a good day out, but some have taken away tractors and motorbikes to give them tender, loving care and another life.